talk that I want to give, turf weed management, a calendar approach from BCS to Santa Claus, really came out of conversations with the man of the hour here at some level. Mr. Bob McCurdy and his friend Jason Cooler, both sod producers from West Tennessee, and had approached me and said, well, you know, it'd be great to have a calendar of what we should be doing weed control-wise for turf grass throughout the year. So you would know in January I should do this, in February I should do this, in March I should do this. I really liked the idea, and I wanted to put some thought into what's the best way to design that such that people will actually remember what to do every month. And it occurred to me, being a relatively big sports fan, that in every month of the year, there's a major sporting event that everybody in this room is aware of. You might not be a fan of it, you might not even watch it, but you're aware that it's happening. And what I'd like to do is kind of associate some weed management practices that you can be implementing in your turfs to those events. So you know, for example, when the BCS championship game is happening, you should be doing X, Y, and Z for your turf. So that's kind of the approach that we'll take this morning. So we'll start with January and go through the year month by month. As I mentioned, the biggest sporting event in January is the BCS National Championship game, right? So the way you can set this up, taking notes or mentally throughout the next 40 minutes, is what should I be doing weed management-wise when the BCS National title game is kind of on the radar, right? Well, January, it's really a month for planning. This is my favorite quote of all time from Dwight Eisenhower. Plans are worthless, but planning is everything, right? Because you can sit here in January, albeit it's February, but the point's the same, and plan out the whole year how you think it's going to go. But the reality is, it's not going to go how you plan it, right? We're dealing with biological systems, with weather, and all sorts of other parts. But there's real value in sitting down and thinking through the way you would like the year to go. Because then you're prepared for changes, right? Evaluating your whole process is going to put you in a stronger position to deal with a change to that process, right? And it's a time to really sit back in January and think about what went wrong the year before, right? One of the things that we had problems with across the state, we had crabgrass breakthrough, pre-emergence herbicide failure. In many cases in 2012, we had a perfect recipe for this. Weather indicated you needed to apply your products earlier than ever before. So you were asking more of them from a residual standpoint. And then the second thing is in certain parts of the state, I don't know as much as it was true in West Tennessee as it was in East Tennessee, we had a wetter year in 2012 than we had in 2011. That combined kind of led us to having a pretty good amount of pre-herbicide breakthrough. You know, Dr. Samples talked to you this morning about indicator weeds. You know, in January, maybe you sit back and you say, okay, well, did I have Virginia buttonweed problems, you know, the last year? And what can I do this year to deal with Virginia buttonweed? We see this probably, I'd argue, it's the most problematic broadleaf weed in our state. I know coming to summer celebration here at the West Tennessee Research and Education Center and sitting in the weed ID booth, I would say if I got 25 samples, 17 of them were Virginia buttonweed. It's a pretty high, some pretty high numbers in terms of incidences of this kind of problem. Nutsedge is another indicator weed for wet soils. I would say extension-wise over the past 3 years or so, probably get more nutsedge control questions than other weeds. So think about the weeds that were problematic last year and what you're going to do this year to try to prevent them from continuing to be problematic. And one of the things you know, with as cold as it is outside today, I kind of feel a little weird presenting this, but the point remains true. I took this picture walking my dog in December in Knoxville. That's a forsythia plant with yellow blooms on it on December 9th. Does that mean that you should be applying pre-emergence herbicides for crabgrass in December? Absolutely not. That's not the point. The point is, as turfgrass managers, I think we get into a calendar mindset of, I put out my pre-herbicide March 15th, right? I do it March 15th every year. Well, the reality is that the weather is changing, biology is changing such that the conditions that favor crabgrass germination, that indicate when that pre-herbicide should go out, they're occurring earlier and earlier and earlier every year. We put pre-herbicides out last year in Knoxville when the soil temperatures were conducive for crabgrass germination, and that happened February 28th. We're not going to be there this year, but this is just an illustration that we need to be ready in January for the potential that we might need to apply those crabgrass herbicides earlier than we're accustomed to doing so. Let's talk about February. The Super Bowl. That is the biggest sporting event in February. When the Super Bowl was happening, what should you be thinking about from a weed management standpoint? Well, again, as I said, smooth crabgrass germination, it's happening earlier. We can get into a long debate as to why, but the reality is it's happening earlier. You can use forsythia plants as an indicator for your timing. The soil conditions that favor smooth crabgrass and large crabgrass seed germination are the same as those which forsythia plants will bloom. So I like to talk about the forsythia plant as my traffic light for crabgrass, that once I see those yellow blooms on a forsythia, it's pretty much go time in terms of putting out your pre-emergence materials for crabgrass. You want to make sure that you have them out before those yellow flowers fall off of that ornamental plant. But there's other targets in February. Winter annual weed control is a big issue throughout West Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, and East Tennessee. And what are we talking about when we're talking about winter annuals? Well, I mean, clearly, henbit is an issue, dead nettle is an issue. We have an array of winter annual broadleaf weeds that tend to be problematic, especially in dormant Bermuda grass. And again, with bluegrass infestations, you can't really give a turf weed control talk and not talk about controlling POA annual. So what can be done for these winter annual broadleaf weeds in February, right? Well, one of the things that's done pretty regularly is glyphosate applications in dormant Bermuda grass for weed control. Raise your hand if you apply glyphosate to dormant Bermuda grass. Pretty good number here. There's a lot of reasons for this. Number one, it's really effective, right? It controls a lot of weeds pretty quickly. It's also pretty cheap, right? The price of glyphosate has really dropped. It's a very economical way to control winter annual weeds in dormant Bermuda grass. And a lot of people do it, right? Well, what that's led to, kind of problematically, is we have cases now in turfgrass of glyphosate-resistant weeds, right? We have them here in West Tennessee. Biotype was identified in Humboldt, resistant to glyphosate applications from consistent glyphosate use in dormant Bermuda grass turf. And I'm going to show you some pictures from Humboldt today and talk a little bit more about that scenario, because I feel that this is a major issue for turf weed management, because we have an opportunity to not let history repeat itself. Because if you talk to our counterparts in agronomic crops right now, the largest issue that they deal with is glyphosate resistance and herbicide resistance in general. You've got one of the experts in that arena here in Jackson, and Larry Steckel, dealing with glyphosate-resistant weeds like palm ramaranth and horseweed and whatnot. It's a major issue of agricultural production. If you look at this data set, this is from the International Survey of Herbicide-Resistant Weeds. And on the y-axis here, this is the number of weeds that have shown resistance to herbicide. And on the x-axis, this is time, right? You don't really need an advanced degree in statistics to conclude that herbicide resistance is increasing at an alarming rate, right? Alarming. This is not all turf, right? This is by and large agronomic crops. But the point is the rate at which herbicide resistance is going up is alarming, right? We have an opportunity now in turf because we don't have a ton of resistance, We don't have a ton of cases. We've got spots here and there where certain weeds are showing resistance to certain herbicides. But we have an opportunity to prevent getting to this level, right? So let's talk about Humboldt. Humboldt Country Club applied Roundup 32 ounces per acre every year since 1990. Report failure in annual bluegrass control in 2009 and 2010. Called myself and Dr. Samples. We were out on an extension visit. Sampled plants from the golf course, brought it back to the lab in Knoxville, ran it through a battery of tests. And here's just an illustration of what was done. So here is the PO biotype from Humboldt. From left to right, this was subjected to increasing rates of Roundup. Start with 0 ounces here on the left, up to 256 fluid ounces of Roundup on the right. 256 fluid ounces. Look at that plant on the right. 256 fluid ounces, and that's not dead, right? That translates to a resistance factor of 12. We took a known susceptible biotype from our research farm. We could get greater than 95% control with 16 fluid ounces, right? That's the highest level of glyphosate resistance that's ever been reported in a grassy weed, regardless of commodity area, right? That's an alarming level of glyphosate resistance. And where did it come from? It came from repeated use of glyphosate year after year after year in dormant Bermuda grass. Well, when a Bermuda grass plant is dormant, folks, it's really no different than a Roundup Ready crop, right? It's tolerant of a Roundup application. So we look to Roundup Ready crops right now and we see the rates of resistance that are going on there. We're the same animal in turfgrass with dormant Bermuda. Unless we change what we're doing, we are trending in the same direction. Superintendent at Humboldt rotates to simazine, a different mode of action the following season. It's a photosystem 2 inhibitor, observes near complete control of annual bluegrass. But an important point needs to be made here. I don't want you to walk out of this room and say, okay, well, I'm just not going to spray Roundup anymore. I'm going to spray simazine because that works. Because if you do that, all you're doing is the exact same thing. Now you're putting out continual selection pressure for biotypes of annual bluegrass resistant to photosystem 2 inhibitors, like simazine. And that's already out there, right? What does glyphosate look like, resistance look like at the beginning in turf, right? Because a lot of you said that you're spraying Roundup right now across your Bermuda grass turfs. It's important that you start to scout what that might look like. This is from a golf course, applied glyphosate. This year, this is 14 days after treatment in 2013. This is a dormant Bermuda grass situation with pretty good POA pressure. And what do you see here? You see differences in symptomology, right? This was sprayed in the same tank, same sprayer, same day. This is, you can see my keys there for scale. That's probably a 1 square foot area, right? Let's focus in here. This plant here, that's probably going to live, right? These plants here, they're probably going to die, right? This is what glyphosate resistance looks like when it starts. Here's just another picture. That's 2 plants side by side. Sprayed with glyphosate, same day, same sprayer, same tank, right? 14 days after application, that plant's probably going to die. That plant's probably going to live, right? That is the population selecting out for the resistant biotype to make it and the susceptible to not make it, right? This happens year after year after year. What happens? You then have a situation like Humboldt where you put 256 fluid ounces out, and you can't get control. And it's not just glyphosate. I'm going to show you next dinitroaniline resistance in our state. Who knows what a dinitroaniline is, right? Dinitroanilines are the herbicide family that we use for pre-emergence weed control in turf. So that's materials like prodiamine, materials like pendimethalin. You're very familiar with those. They've been around for a long time. They do a good job. Continued use of the same mode of action there has given us resistance in our state. It's a problem. It's happened in other states as well. We have goosegrass resistant to dinitroanilines in North Carolina. We have annual bluegrass resistant to dinitroanilines here in Tennessee and in North Carolina, with new reports from last spring as well. Yesterday, I was at Memphis Country Club, as Dr. Samples mentioned, and there they feel very strongly that they have annual bluegrass resistant to ALS inhibitors, right? ALS inhibitors are things like Monument and Revolver, that they can't control their annual bluegrass now with repeated applications of those materials, right? This is scary because as resistance grows, think about it, you're now losing tools in your tool shed for weed control, and it's going to make things inevitably more expensive. So here's a picture. This is from a golf course in East Tennessee, and it's a screen for prodiamine resistance in the field. And it's important because one of the issues when you're trying to screen for resistance to a pre-emergence herbicide is you got to make sure that you put the herbicide out before the weed has emerged, right? Because by definition, that's how these things work. These are applied August 22nd in Knoxville, right? So we know we have no POA at that time. This is a pretty standard pre-emergence timing that we'd like people to follow. We put out an array of prodiamine rates. We come back in. This picture was taken February 1st. And what do you see? Well, on the bottom here, you've got a pound of prodiamine. That's a pound and a quarter. That's a half a pound. I would argue that 3/4 of a pound AI is probably the rate that most people go at. So we're above and below that X rate. And then you have it untreated here. And then in the second step, you can see there's prodiamine at a pound and a quarter as well, right? Very strongly, we've got experiments being initiated today in hydroponic culture to confirm the level of resistance in a lab situation. But again, this field site would tell us that this biotype of annual bluegrass is resistant to prodiamine. If you look at the plots here and here, we've rotated to a different herbicide. This is indaziflam, sold under the trade name Spectacle. It's a different mode of action than prodiamine. It's a cellulose biosynthesis inhibitor, and it appears, at least in this one location, to be doing a very nice job of controlling resistant biotypes. So again, we're rotating modes of action. Indaziflam launched in 2010. It's an alkylazine cellulose biosynthesis inhibitor. One of the unique things about this herbicide was it was developed for use in turf first. Most products are developed for use in agronomic crops and then move their way into turf. This is vice versa. Of this mode of action, I would argue it's the most broad spectrum in terms of it controls both grasses and broadleaf weeds. The only other CBI or cellulose biosynthesis inhibitor that we really have in turf is isoxaben, sold under the trade name Gallery. That's really only a broadleaf material, and indaziflam tends to be effective on both grasses and broadleaf weeds. And because of this mode of action, as a cellulose biosynthesis inhibitor, I feel that there's a real fit here for managing resistance. Here's just a picture of what indaziflam can do from a winter annual perspective. This was applied September 15th, photo taken January 30th. You can see here outside of the treated plot, we've got a wide array of winter annual broadleaves beyond just POA, purple dead nettle, henbit, hairy bittercress, chickweeds, as well as the annual bluegrass. So that's a lot for February, but February is a pretty big month for weed control. What about March, right? March is, what's the biggest sporting events in March? Right? Final Four, March Madness, right? So when they start talking about March Madness, what should you be thinking about weed control-wise? Well, number one, I think you should be thinking about your pre-crab programs. There's an array of tools in your toolbox here for pre-emergence crabgrass control. I've only given you an example of trade names. You can find many of these under various trade names. But the things with pre-crab control to emphasize, number one is timing, right? You have to put these things out at an appropriate timing, and definitely use your forsythia plant as an indicator of appropriate timing. That once we have those yellow blooms, that should be a signal that you should be applying pre-emergence crabgrass treatments. But if you look at the labels, they'll call for 1/4 to 1/2 inch of irrigation within 24 to 48 hours, right? Whether that's irrigation or rainfall, products have to be watered in. Why? Well, there's two reasons, and they're important. Number one, where do these herbicides work? Right? They work on crabgrass seed. Crabgrass seed, where is it? It's in the soil profile. So we need to get the herbicide down into the soil profile in order to control the crabgrass that we're trying to prevent from becoming a mature plant. The other thing is if we leave the product up on the turf canopy, what happens? Well, these herbicides that we use for pre-emergence weed control, they tend to be pretty volatile, right? So we can lose active ingredient to the atmosphere, right? So you've got to water it in order to preserve your investment and what you paid for in the pre-emergence herbicide. You want to make sure that you are watering that into the soil profile. What about mowing? How can mowing affect a pre-emergence herbicide? If you came to our field day, you saw a nice demonstration of this. We took an array of products labeled for pre-emergence crabgrass control. We put them out in single and split applications. What does that mean? Well, that means we took the whole maximum AI load for the year, we put it out once in pre-emergence crabgrass timing in February. Then we took the same AI load and we divided it, and we put half of it out in February and then half of it out 8 weeks later, right? So we did this, and you can see the rates there as reference. And we maintained the turf at 2 mowing heights. So we put those same treatments out in an area that we knew was infested with crabgrass. We did it at a 0.6-inch cutting height with a reel mower, and then we did it at a 2-inch mowing height with a rotary mower to see, does that difference in mowing height affect the performance of those crabgrass herbicides. And here's some data from that trial, and what we ended up seeing was that was definitely the case, that mowing affected herbicide performance pretty much regardless of product selected. So this data, this is 5 months after treatment last year in Knoxville. On the y-axis we have crabgrass control, and on the x-axis we have our single and sequential programs. The yellow bars are the lower cutting height, the 0.6 inches. The green bars are the higher cutting height, the 2 inches. What do you take from this slide? What you should take from this slide is regardless of application program, maintaining turf at a higher height of cut gave you better crabgrass control, right? The same is true if we break it down by product, right? And we only look at the different products. You can see across the board, right? The green bars are higher than the yellow bars. If we put out a pre-emergence herbicide and we maintain the turf at a higher height of cut, that pre-emergence herbicide is going to work better, right? Now, you may be sitting here going, 2 inches, I can't maintain turf at 2 inches, I've got to be higher than that. I understand that. Or you might say, hey, I can't let my turf grow up to 2 inches. I manage a sports field that's 3/4 of an inch. I understand that too. The point here is that any incremental gain you can make in getting that cutting height a little bit higher is going to make that herbicide perform better. So if you're working, whether it's in a homeowner scenario, you can get a homeowner to raise a height of cut up, that would be beneficial. If you can talk coaches into raising heights and cut up a little bit, that's going to be beneficial in terms of making your pre-emergence crabgrass herbicides work more efficiently. Why does it work? Well, think about it. You have a higher height of cut turf. What does that do? It shades the soil surface, right? So crabgrass seed is in the soil, right? Crabgrass seed's no different than turf seed. It needs light to germinate. If we can shade the soil surface, we're going to make the conditions less favorable for crabgrass to become established. What else are we doing? We return clippings, right? Clippings have anywhere from, say, 2 to 5% nitrogen, depending on grass and fertilization program. It's like free fertilizer, right? Especially in a Bermuda grass situation, you're making that turf, by returning those clippings, more competitive against weed infestation. So let's move on. Let's move to April, right? What's the biggest sporting event in April? Right? The Masters tournament. If we're playing the Masters and you haven't put a pre-crab herbicide out, apply it right now, right? You need to be applying. I would argue that if you are into the point where they are playing the Masters and you haven't put a pre-crab herbicide out, you need to think about putting out something that will give you both pre and early post control. To mention, active ingredient is dithiopyr. This is labeled for control of newly emerged crabgrass plants. Newly emerged means less than a tiller in size. So that would be an option in that scenario. We've seen in Dazaflam applications on small pre-tillering plants exhibit both early post control and residual in a field situation. But I would encourage you to go, if either one of those products doesn't fit your use pattern, take something you know has post-crop activity, whether that's Drive, whether that's a Claim Extra, whether that's MSMA, and tank mix it with your pre-herbicide to give yourself some insurance. So knock down any crabgrass that may have come up and germinated, and then have your residual to get through the rest of the year. We did this a couple years ago at Field Day to give you some examples. Whether it's Tenacity Barricade, this is Drive Pendulum, this is a Claim Dimension, this is Solitaire Echelon. All of these programs are very similar. These data that you see, these were applied to tillering plants in May and then rated 4 months later. So we were able to control the tillering plants that were there and then have residual to get us throughout the summer. There's also a window for Dallas grass control in April. It is not as good of a window or as wide of a window as what we have in fall. But there is a time that we've identified using growing degree days where Dallas grass tends to be very susceptible to herbicide treatments. The problem is that at this time you have to really scout for it. You can see here, this is my graduate student out trying to find the Dallas grass plants in the turf canopy. So, driving by on your utility vehicle or, a 25 mile an hour in an F-150 pickup ID is probably not going to cut it. I mean, you really have to get out on your hands and knees and scout for these plants. But what we know is that we can essentially top kill these plants down to their perennial portions that'll take them almost all summer to recover from that herbicide treatment. There's also a window of opportunity in April to make applications for Bermuda grass suppression in cool season turf. Again, not as good as fall, and we'll talk about fall, but there is a window with growing degree days where we know that the susceptibility of Bermuda grass to post-emergence chemistry is going to be a little bit more than it will be midsummer. If you have the option to do it based on a sport schedule, if you're overseeding ryegrass into a Bermuda grass situation, the earlier you can spray out your ryegrass, the better. To have that Bermuda grass not be in competition with an overseeded ryegrass turf, the earlier you can spray it out, the better. Coming in April, temperature conditions will be conducive for that application. And you've got a lot of tools in your tool shed to do this with. Here's just the list. I mean, Revolver, Monument, Katana, Transit, Certainty, Tribute, Curve, all of those have activity for ryegrass removal in Bermuda grass situations. There's a real good piece of research out of Virginia Tech that found that soil temperature is a big factor in ryegrass transition performance with these chemistries. For every degree above 60 Fahrenheit, you had a 2% increase in control. So that's kind of evidence as to why you don't want to be spraying these, say, now, right? You want to wait until April or maybe even a little later for things to warm up. We've also seen enhanced activity putting these treatments out kind of in conjunction with a nitrogen fertilizer application. So the scenario we like to promote is if you come in with your first fertilizer application of spring, you want to spray out your ryegrass, put the fertilizer out, and then come right behind that with your transitioning herbicide. And you want to do this because if you let your ryegrass persist throughout the summer, you're going to have issues with regards to trying to remove clumpy ryegrass. This is just an illustration. This is spraying out ryegrass overseeded the following year. There's really no differences between the products. When we let things persist and get into a clumpy state, things get a lot harder to control with herbicides. What about May? Now, I gave this talk to the TNLA group a couple weeks ago, and they disagreed with my #1 sporting event of May. But for me, it's not really an event. May for me is when you kind of realize for the first time, wow, they're playing baseball, right, at the professional level. I think I'm going to edit this slide set, though, because I think the Kentucky Derby is probably a better fit for the sporting event of May. So for the purposes of today, let's talk about the Kentucky Derby as your mental trigger, right? Well, when the Kentucky Derby is being run, that's a time you should be thinking about your split application for goosegrass control. So this would be if you put out a pre-herbicide at crab timing at a half rate, you want to be making that split application 8 to 10 weeks later. That's going to be just about when that Kentucky Derby is running. Spraying out your ryegrass, again, I would like to see you spray out your ryegrass in late April or early May, if at all possible, with the products we've already covered. As you move into June, July, and August, you have a lot of sporting events on your radar, a lot. For me, I may be the only person in the room who cares about this, but this is when you play the Stanley Cup in June. In July, or in late June, we have the U.S. Open Championship. Looking forward to that this year. I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to visit the grounds crew at Marion, the host of this year's U.S. Open in 2013 last year. Should be a great event. It's when NFL training camps open, late July, right? As we move into August, we start to play preseason games, but at the same time, you have other things to be concerned with in June, July, and August, at least in my opinion, than controlling weeds. You know, diseases are an issue. If you have fescue, this is going to be a time where brown patch is really going to be something that you're going to have to manage pretty aggressively. Really kind of warrants more attention than a weed control application would. Right? Drought's an issue. I mean, who remembers the 2 weeks at the end of June last year when it was like 120, right? I mean, having grass burn up. This is an issue, management-wise, that's going to warrant more of your attention than a weed control application would. There's also a chance to be, if you're managing warm season grasses, to get really aggressive in terms of organic matter management, right? You probably won't remove this much thatch from your Bermuda grass, but I'd like to see you remove some. This is from Waialae Country Club in Honolulu, Hawaii, and they would take truckloads of thatch out, almost aggressively verticut down to the soil surface and let everything come back. But really, from a weed control standpoint, I think June, July, and August is the time for you to be taking notes, right? To be scouting your turf, taking some notes. Hey, I've got nutsedge over here. Or hey, I've got ground ivy problems, or my pre-herbicide program didn't work, right? Because that's going to allow you, when you get to January, to have some in-season notes from that year to help you build a better program moving forward for the fall and growing season. September through October, this will be busy for weed management, right? This is the time, if you are struggling with Dallas grass control and Bermuda grass control, as we all are, we want you to talk about September, really, as a time to make applications to remove those weeds. We've done a lot of work to try to identify times where Dallas grass and Bermuda grass are most susceptible to herbicides. And in doing that, we found that weather data can really help us by looking at our weather conditions. What you have on this graph, this is a graph of accumulated growing degree day values for Knoxville. This is from 2011 to 2012. It's very similar. And a growing degree day, I think most people here are familiar with that. It's just a measure of how much heat we accumulate throughout the season. We take the average temperature for the day and we compare it to a baseline. And the higher we are above the baseline is an indicator of how much warmer we are. So if you look here, if you start right here, this is January 1st, and then this is December 31st. This shows you what you would expect as you go through spring, through February and March and April. You get warmer and warmer and warmer. We're accumulating more growing degree days. But what happens, right? We kind of plateau out where we get into the middle of August. We don't really get warmer anymore, right? What ends up happening is we tend to drop off. You can see this ledge. It's like almost falling off a cliff where we don't now really accumulate heat anymore. Things are almost at about a halfway point heat-wise than they were prior back in May and June. Right? Well, that dip, that trigger, is where we've found Dallas grass to be most susceptible to herbicides. Right? This happens when the average temperature for the day falls below 72 Fahrenheit. So if you take the high temperature and the low temperature, you add that up and you divide it by 2, if that number is less than 72 Fahrenheit, that's going to be kind of your trigger for Dallas grass control. It just so happens that that event for the past 3 seasons has coincided with the weekend of the Tennessee-Florida game. So you can use that almost as a mental trigger for Dallas grass control, that once they start to play the Tennessee-Florida game, that should be kind of an indicator that, hey, I can get my programs together now to go aggressively at Dallas grass. Program-wise, right, warm season turf, we heard this morning from a previous speaker about MSMA's continued use in golf, sod farms, and rights of way. Tribute Total is a new product. It's a magnetized carbazone, 4M sulfuron, calisulfuron, that has shown some promise for Dallas grass control. Most of your SUs offer suppression. And a key thing with all 3 of these bullets, sequential applications over time. There's no silver bullet for Dallas grass. In cool season turf, your only option is going to be fluazepop applications. And really there, it's important that that's fall and spring only. We want to stay away from fluazepop in summer. And all these, again, sequential applications, 3 to 4 week intervals. You have the opportunity to spot treat with glyphosate if you can tolerate what the damage might look like. But you got to be very careful. It's a non-selective herbicide. Dallas grass is very sensitive to glyphosate, but the other turf in your yard may as well be too. So if you can live with this, this is a very effective option, but a lot of people can't. Right? September, as we move into October, this is another time to think about winter annual weed control. So if you have a lot of winter annual pressure right now, when we get to September, you don't want to be sitting back here in February thinking about the winter annuals and treating them post-emergently. This is the time to put out a pre-emergence herbicide to control those weeds, right? It's wide spectrum. Whether it's POA, henbit, hairy bittercress, as I said, has become really more problematic across the state, chickweed. There's a lot of options out there to aggressively go after those. Spectacle is just one. There's 2 formulations of Spectacle. It's a WP and a flow. Rate-wise, our data would really want you at either 2.5 ounces of the WP, which is 6.14 fluid ounces of the flow. We've seen that this has some early post activity, so you can really have more application flexibility in the fall. In East Tennessee, you can delay your applications till even October 15th and still have really good winter annual control. Barricade, you can't get that early post activity from. You're going to need to be earlier in the fall. Really want to make sure that's out before anything has emerged. Rates from 3/4 to a pound and a half. And there's a lot of players in this game, whether it's echelon, pendulum, dimension, that are going to follow a very similar use pattern with respect to time. If you're managing creeping bentgrass greens, this is the time to control annual bluegrass in those environments. We also see this to be a really good time to control broadleaves post-emergently, specifically in cool season turf. And many times, these applications will be coupled with seeding, or lawns will have been renovated, newly seeded. We want to control broadleaves in there, which begs a question about herbicide use around seeding. There's several products out there that have labeling for that. Tenacity and Drive are just examples, and I encourage you to look at those labels. Your auxin-type herbicides used for broadleaf control, there's language on there about delaying to the 2nd or the 4th mowing, depending on product. But that should kind of put you in a time frame window. But really, I would encourage you to have all your fall establishment. Anything you do, whether it's weed control-wise, renovation-wise, have your fall establishment. If you're going to renovate a lawn, have that complete by the World Series, right? So if you can use that kind of as a benchmark and try to have that complete by the World Series, I think you're going to be in good shape going into the next growing season. You get into November, what should you be doing weed control-wise in November? I think this is the time that you get ready for next year. Look at your notes from earlier in the season. Maybe this is an early order program time for you to get a discount from whatever manufacturer you get product from, and maybe plan winter education events of where you're going to get your points for the following season. And as Bob started in my introduction in December, you shouldn't worry about anything related to weed control. It's Christmas. Take a month off. That's all I have technical content-wise. I'll remind everybody our field day, it's a turf and ornamental field day, September 12th this year in Knoxville. We would love to see you there. You can visit our Facebook page as well for more information about our turf grass extension programs. That all links to Twitter. If you're a Twitter person, you'll be able to access the content there as well.